Odawa, the Sac, the Meskwaki, the Kickapoo, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and the Chickasaw nations. It is important for us to acknowledge these Native nations and for us to work with them as we move forward as an institution with Native peoples at the core of our efforts. We would also like to note that this will be our last exhibit in this space before we move into the new building. The Viceroyalty of Peru in the times of the Conde Montemar will be up through this May. Finally, I would like to introduce the curators of the exhibit and then let them tell you a bit more about it themselves. Ana Rodríguez is our fearless digitization coordinator and registrar. She has been in the field of special collections since 2004 and has been with us since 2019. Dr. Antonio Sotomayor is an associate professor and librarian of Latin American and Caribbean studies, as well as an associate professor of Spanish and Portuguese. He is currently on sabbatical, and we thank him for joining us here today. So please join me in welcoming them.
Good afternoon. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to the people that helped us make this exhibit possible. Ooh. I want to start by acknowledging Lynn Thomas, head of the RBML, first for suggesting the idea of creating an exhibit based on the Montemar letters, and second, for all her support during our curatorial process. Marco Valladares, our exhibit's conservator, for his wonderful and genius work in designing the cases and treatments for our books. Jill Thomas, for her amazing job designing our signs and promotional materials. Carrie Lynchett, for helping us promote the exhibit and ordering the food, yeah. Kate Cooker and Caroline Silowich, for reviewing our text, and Rutan Mori for helping us during the initial stages of the exhibit. And to all my colleagues in RBML and digital services, thank you for all your help and support. I would like to start by providing some context about the Conde de Montemar collection. This is an 18th century manuscript collection composed of letters between members of the Spanish noble family of Carrillo de Albornoz y Bravo de Lagunas, that during this time period forged a strong transatlantic network between Spain and Peru. Dating from 1761 to 1799, the correspondence delves into stories dealing with family matters, better known as gossip, or if you speak Spanish, chisme, and their ambitions and plans of wealth and power in Peru. With Spain still under the rule of the Bourbon dynasty, we also learn about their social dynamics as part of an elite limeño group, and their relationships with governmental figures such as the Viceroy and Count of Superunda. If you're interested in learning more about the Montemar letters, the collection is available in our digital library. Going back to February 2020, merely a few weeks before the pandemic quarantine, Antonio and I started a series of meetings to plan an exhibit based on the Montemar letters. That first meeting proved to be fruitful. We talked about using themes from the Montemar collection as an opportunity to highlight and magnify the multidimensional aspects of the Spanish conquest and colonization experience in South America, but centering the attention on Peru. Little did we know that our work was going to be interrupted for a couple of months. We were back in the library by July 2020 to continue working on the exhibit, shifting our focus and energies on the intellectual and logistical process. Exhibits are all about weaving a functional script that will lead us to a story. During the process of brainstorming ideas, it became clear that Peru's Spanish colonial history was the common denominator of a story. Surveying the Montemar letters show us how relations evolved between the Spanish Empire and the Viceroyalty, with power, wealth, and privilege, all intersecting and interweaving into the history of Peru. Departing from this premise, since Peru was the second most powerful viceroyalty after Mexico, gave us the perfect roadmap to develop our narrative and build the exhibit's story puzzle. Spain is clearly the second main character of our story. As the most powerful plus ultra empire for 4 centuries, Spain was an almost implacable force in the contest of conquest and colonization of the Americas. But certainly, the pursuit of traversing known frontiers produced cataclysmic consequences for the Old and New World. Conquistadors, acting in the name of the crown and Christianity, paved the way to human rights violations against indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans. Indeed, a brutal record of colonization. On the other hand, we also have some notable contributions and discoveries, a more positive perspective of these intrepid journeys, such as the discovery of the Pacific by Vasco Núñez de Balboa and the development of viceroyalties as a system of overseas government. The cases in the exhibit follow a thematic approach rather than a chronological treatment. This methodology allows us to correlate and combine major themes from the Montemar letters and the history of Peru, and to complement this with books. The exhibit also marks the first time that RBML has borrowed and featured archaeological items in loan from the Spurlock Museum. The cases 1 through 4 gather major subjects tied to the development of the Viceroyalty of Peru. In case 1, we deal with the fall of the Inca Empire. Case 2, with the colonization of Peru and the discovery of the route to the Pacific by Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Case 3, with the Viceroyalty's system of laws, religion, and economy. And then in case 4, we take a peripheral look at the governmental components of the Viceroyalty of Peru. In cases 5 and 6, we feature a total of 4 letters from the Montemar collection. These letters were translated, 3 of them by me, have mercy please, based on the transcriptions generated by a group of doctoral students working under the supervision of Dr. Antonio Sotomayor. A notable detail of these translations is the inclusion of Spanish terms such as mayorazgo and corregimiento, specific to the times of the letters, and which to this day don't have a parallel definition in English. It is my hope that this exhibit sparks your interest to learn more about the Montemar collection and topics related to South America. I now leave you with my dear colleague, Dr. Antonio Sotomayor.
Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to the opening of our exhibit, The Viceroyalty of Peru in the Times of the Conde de Montemar. When Ana approached me about collaborating on an exhibit on Latin America a few years ago, I was excited and appreciative. Excited because I know the high quality of the exhibits done at RBML, and appreciative because of the high quality of the exhibits at RBML. Looking at the result here on display today, it is much more than what I was expecting. Gracias, Ana, for thinking of me to collaborate on this project. I was also excited for the opportunity to showcase some of our magnificent and special Latin American items in our collection. For those of you that do not know, and I believe Professor Nils Jacobsen will talk about this as well, Latin American and Caribbean collection is one of the largest in the nation, with over 1 million volumes. We are strong in all regions and time periods, but we have a special holdings in the Andes, as you can see here in this exhibit. Books about Latin America and the Caribbean were present in the library's original collection from 1867. These include William Prescott's Conquest of Peru from 1847 and Johann Jacobs Schudy's Travels in Peru from 1865. So our collection is extensive and a pioneer in our library. What you see here today is just a small selection of the materials about the Andes and Latin America in general. One of the jewels of the collection is the collection of letters from the family of the Conde de Montemar. The Carrillo de Albornoz y Bravo de Lagunas family was one of, if not the wealthiest in the Viceroyalty of Peru, with much social and political power. This preeminence is clearly seen in this collection of approximately 300 letters that range from 1761 to 1799. This collection was acquired by my predecessor, the great Professor Nelly Gonzalez, who, among many other accomplishments, was the founder of the Bolivian Studies Journal and also president of the Seminar on the Acquisitions of Latin American Library Materials, SALAM. A renowned bibliographer of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Nelly contributed immensely to the development and dissemination of the Andean collection, a responsibility I strive to preserve. As such, with the collaboration of many specialists, some gone, others still here, we digitize and publish in open access the entire collection of letters from this family. When I began my position as Latin American Caribbean Studies librarian in December 2012, I met with Professor Nils Jacobsen, a noted historian of Peru, to chat about the collection, given his broad experience with it. When he mentioned that we had a collection of colonial letters from Peru, I was more than interested. It did not take long for me to understand the uniqueness and value of this collection, and so I have been working with it ever since. Currently, we're working on the transcription of the entire collection to publish them in book format with a series of indexes to facilitate their use by students and scholars. In that regard, I am deeply grateful to Professor Jacobsen for introducing me to this rich collection. I'm also grateful to him for all his support throughout the years, and especially for sharing with us here today some of his ideas regarding the Andean collection and Andean history. I also want to thank Lynn Thomas and the rest of the RBML team for their support with this exhibit, which I believe will be the last held here in this space before RBML's move to the Special Collection Building next year. I'm sure you will agree with me that the exhibit setup looks flawless. This is due to Marco Valladares Perez and his amazing skills with exhibits mounting designs. Thank you, Marco. Lastly, I want to offer once again my sincere appreciation to Ana Rodríguez. Ana's professionalism, motivation, expertise, and hard work is unparalleled. Ha sido un verdadero placer colaborar contigo, Ana. Your hard work is humbling. Your expertise in exhibit design is admirable. I'm very proud of our work together. Muchas gracias por esta gran oportunidad. Well, again, thank you all for coming. But before we go off to enjoy the exhibit, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our esteemed speaker, my dear friend, Professor Nils Jacobsen.
Before starting my talk this afternoon, I wanted to thank my daughter, Johanna, who's here visiting from Seattle, because she spared you between 5 and 7 minutes because my original draft was too long and she was expert at cutting it. She, by the way, is also a librarian and will be the president of the Washington State Library Organization in the coming year. Good, to pull out my glasses. In the year 1566, Polo de Ondegardo, the learned corregidor or governor of the province of Cusco in the Viceroyalty of Peru, the very heartland of the erstwhile Inca Empire, had a confrontation with Fray Domingo de Santo Tomas, a Dominican priest and bishop of La Plata, the modern-day Sucre in Bolivia, about the right way of bringing Christianity to the Andeans. Polo had assembled a group of indigenous Andeans in La Plata, and in the presence of the bishop commenced to interrogate them about their religious practices. Another key Spanish administrator, High Court Justice Juan de Matienzo, the author of El Gobierno del Perú, or the Government of Peru, wrote about this interrogation. It is truly scandalous that this past year the licentiate Polo spoke to the Indians in the presence of their bishop and made them confess that they possessed the huacas, or communal deities or idols, he named to them, and that they were celebrating festivals for their idols. And he specified the huacas and the festivals and the days on which they were celebrating them. He told them how bad this was and that they ought not to do it anymore. And they answered that no one had ever informed them that it was bad, and that now that they were being told, they would not henceforth do it. We become witnesses here of a profound confrontation between two visions of Spain, of how Spain should consolidate its imperial domination over the Andeans. Polo de Ondegardo was one of the key architects of what might be called the hardline approach to disarticulating Andean civilizations. And I just learned from our outstanding Latin American acquisitions librarian, Antonio Sotomayor, that our library recently acquired a manuscript penned by this very man, whose deeds and writings are so important for our understanding the struggles about the shape of post-conquest Andean culture. This is only one of the latest in a long string of sustained and significant acquisitions of both manuscript and print materials that have made the University of Illinois one of the 6 largest repositories for Latin American materials in the United States. When William Spence Robertson became the University of Illinois' first Latin American historian in 1909, he began a decades-long collection project. He traveled across the subcontinent from Mexico City to Buenos Aires to acquire antiquarian and new imprints published in Latin America, Spain, and Portugal about the region. Since the 1960s, this collection activity was carried on systematically by a string of outstanding Latin American acquisitions librarians, first Carl Deal, then Nelly Gonzalez, and now Antonio Sotomayor. Thanks to all of their efforts and book donations from important Latin American scholars here, the University Library now holds more than 1 million discrete items about the region, with an extraordinary breadth and depth of the collection. This collection is world-class, as are its stewards, the library staff. There is a rich collection on the Republican period, a talk for another day. This exhibit focuses on materials from the colonial period of Spanish America, starting in 1492 and lasting until the 1820s, longer in Cuba and Puerto Rico, with emphasis on the Viceroyalty of Peru and its core Andean region. I want to thank the co-curators, Ana Rodríguez from the Rare Books and Manuscript Library, and Antonio Sotomayor, Latin American Acquisitions Librarian in the International Library, and the designer, Marco Valladares, for the many months, and indeed years, as I now found out, of dedicated work to put together this fantastic exhibit. I also want to thank Lynn Thomas, head of the Rare Books and Manuscript Library, for supporting and hosting this exhibit, and many RBML staff members for their support and care in the curatorial process. This exhibit is important for 2 reasons. It demonstrates so effectively what treasures of manuscripts and imprints on Spanish America from before 1800 our library holds. And secondly, it shines a light on the Andean world in the early modern age. Among the books included in the exhibition, we find works from the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, covering the gamut of religious works, legal codes, early histories of America and the Inca Empire, theatrical works, and of course many works by travelers from across Europe, all trying to decipher what these lands unexpectedly brought into the orbit of Europe portended for the power of different kingdoms, for the international order, for trade, and for the very understanding of the physical and cultural world. It is noteworthy that among the works exhibited here, there are quite a few early translations from original Spanish editions published in Paris, Amsterdam, Milan, London, Geneva, or the German lands. Allow me to single out 2 works exhibited here for your consideration. Garcilaso de la Vega, El Inca, Comentarios Reales de los Incas, or Royal Commentaries of the Incas, originally published in Spain in 1609. Born in Cusco, the capital of the Inca Empire, in 1539, a scant 8 years after Francisco Pizarro had landed on the north coast of Peru, Garcilaso was the son of a conquistador and the Ñusta, or Inca princess, Isabel Chimpu Ocllo, a granddaughter of the Inca Huayna Capac. Garcilaso grew up with his mother and her extended Inca family, a major source of his deep knowledge of Inca history and civilization. Simultaneously, he received formal Spanish education alongside the sons of Francisco Pizarro. As a teenager, he traveled to Spain and never returned to Peru. In 1609, he published the 2-volume Royal Commentaries, a highly complex defense of the Incas, offering a Platonist interpretation of Inca religion as a precursor to Christian monotheism and Inca civilization as bringing light to the dark barbaric Andes. The work by Garcilaso, considered one of the best Spanish stylists of Spain's golden age, was the most well-known and respected interpretation of the Incas until the 20th century. Let me also say a few words about Juan de Solórzano Pereira, who lived from 1575 to 1655, a renowned Spanish jurist who served as justice in the Audiencia, or High Court of Lima, before returning to Spain and becoming a member of the Council of the Indies, the highest council of advisors of the Spanish king on matters of the Americas. The work by Solórzano we have here, Disputationem de Indiarium Jure, from 1629, written shortly after he returned to Spain from his tour of duty in the Andes, forms part of a larger body of works by Solórzano to compile and systematize all the legal instruments such as cedulas, provisions, letters, instructions, and ordinances issued by the king in Madrid regarding the governance of the Americas. Solórzano did not wish merely to compile a corpus of colonial laws that simply imposed Spanish rules and regulations on the Americas. He struggled to understand native institutions in the Andes. For example, the fundamental notion of ayllu, or community, as the basic social cell of Andean society, and somehow make it compatible with terms of Spain's Roman law tradition. The stars of this exhibit are undoubtedly the letters exchanged between the various members of the Conde de Montemar family in Madrid and Lima between 1761 and 1799 that our dear Nelly Gonzalez acquired some 25 years ago for the university library. The complete collection of nearly 300 letters is a major source for the social and political history of the Viceroyalty of Peru during the late colonial period, and we are so grateful to Nelly's successor Antonio Sotomayor and the staff of the Rare Books and Manuscript Library for undertaking the tremendous effort to make this collection widely available by transcribing and digitizing it. Politics in the 18th century Spanish Empire remained the politics of a courtly society. One's power was expressed in terms of access to and rank at the royal court, and in the colonies, the court of the viceroys. The Carrillo de Albornoz y Bravo de Lagunas family, whose head was the Count of Montemar, stood close to the apex of that socio-political hierarchy. They held rich lands in the valleys of the central coast of Peru, producing sugar, cotton, and grapes, with the labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants, and they occupied high positions in viceregal administration. They were participant observers of the schemes and intrigues coursing through the corridors of the royal and viceregal palaces, and their own political fortunes shifted over these decades due to the outcome of such intrigues. In the letters, they plotted the best course of action for the family, they worried about prices and shipping for their products, and they linked all these concerns with the family's domestic sphere. Which sister, cousin, or niece would be married to whom, the health and happiness of this or that family member, and the most appropriate education of their children. In short, the letters grant us access to the world of the rich and powerful in Lima and Madrid and demonstrate how the public and private spheres were so closely interconnected in that world. I would like to conclude with a few remarks situating the Andean region in the early modern world. It had been the scene of one of the largest pre-modern empires, stretching for more than 4,000 kilometers from modern Colombia to Argentina and Chile. The Incas had managed to integrate hundreds of different ethnic and linguistic groups into their state structure with the help of without the help of writing or the wheel, instead relying on an ingenious and highly complex mnemonic system of knotted cords called quipus, and on llama herds for transport across their 10,000 kilometer paved road network. In some ways, the Inca Empire exemplifies the recent revisionist claims by David Graeber and David Wengro in their modestly titled The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, that seeks to overcome a Eurocentric evolutionary history of civilizations. The Incas belonged to those ancient civilizations that managed to achieve great complexity and sophistication while lacking much of what conventionally has been considered indispensable for evolutionary progress of great civilizations. And this Incaic civilization did not disappear overnight once Pizarro and his ragtag army of 180 men had executed Inca Atahualpa in Cajamarca in 1532. So the Incas certainly are critical for us today if we wish to overcome worn-out hierarchical and ethnocentric or Eurocentric notions of world history. In the Atlantic world, from the time of Columbus until about 1750, the center was the South Atlantic, the linkages between Africa, Spain, and Portugal, and the Iberian monarchies' territories from the Caribbean to coastal Brazil, the River Plate, and Chile. This was the zone in which this cycle of globalization, the bidirectional flows of trade, of people, of technology and knowledge, was most intensive, until this hegemony was successfully challenged by the budding Northwestern European empires during the 18th century. And in this older Atlantic world, the Viceroyalty of Peru, or in geographic terms, Spanish South America from Panama to from Panama to the contested borders with the unincorporated indigenous polities a few hundred kilometers south of Buenos Aires and Santiago de Chile, was central. Wealthy people in Lima, like the family of the Counts of Montemar, were eating their dinner on Chinese porcelain plates and might even have Chinese servants brought to the Americas along with spices, tea, and silk cloths by the Manila galleon, which in turn took silver produced deep and high in the Andes to feed the Chinese hunger for precious metals. In this newly globalized system, Andean silver also brought inflation to Spain and from there to the rest of Europe, one of the causes of what historians used to call the 17th century crisis of Europe. This massive output of Andean silver, often produced at high altitudes above 4,000 meters or 14,000 feet, as the Cerro Rico, or Ridge Mountain of Potosí, the largest city in the Western Hemisphere during the early 17th century, harnessed Incaic forms of governance and imperial appropriation for the Spanish mercantilist goals of maximizing power and revenue. It based the operation of mines and silver refineries on draft laborers called mitayos, modeled on a similar institution of the Incas. This was dangerous and unhealthy work, where the miners often stayed below ground for a week or more. Mortality was high. But those who stayed on beyond the 6 months of the draft could earn higher salaries than anywhere else in the Viceroyalty. Most importantly, the exploitation of indigenous Andean laborers was tied to considerable autonomy in their home ayllus, or communities, under the rule of their native lords, or curacas. It was this system of indirect rule that Polo de Ondegardo complained about in 1566, and which allowed so many Andeans to maintain aspects of their religions and broader culture for centuries after the conquest. There is little question then that the early modern Andean world, which this exhibit illustrates so beautifully to us, in all its peculiarities played a central role in the globalizing world. I hope you will enjoy the exhibit and use it to rethink assumptions about the evolution of the world we all share. Thank you.